The last bullet, the dust hung in the air like a shroud over Copper Creek trading post, where decent folk rarely ventured after sundown. Jack Morrison pulled his weathered hat low over his eyes as he guided his horse through the settlement's single muddy street. He hadn't come here by choice. His ranch was running dangerously low on ammunition, and this god-forsaken place was the only trading post within 100 miles. Jack had been living alone on his spread for the better part of 5 years, ever since Sarah died of fever. The isolation suited him fine. People brought complications, and Jack Morrison had had enough complications to last several lifetimes. His ranch was small but profitable enough, nestled in a valley where good grass and clean water made for healthy cattle. He kept to himself, made his deliveries to town once a month, and avoided unnecessary human contact. But ammunition was a necessity, not a luxury. Without bullets, a man couldn't protect his stock from wolves, his property from rustlers, or himself from the various unsavory characters who drifted through the territory. So here he was, despite his better judgment, preparing to deal with the kind of men who operated out of places like Copper Creek. The trading post was a ramshackle affair, weathered planks held together more by habit than nails, with a sagging porch that groaned under the weight of a few barrels and crates. Yellow light spilled from the windows, and Jack could hear rough voices and the clink of bottles from within. He tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped inside. The interior was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. A handful of men clustered around a makeshift bar, while others sat at tables playing cards or conducting business in hushed tones. Jack's entrance drew a few glances, but most of the patrons quickly returned to their drinks and conversations. In a place like this, minding your own business was a survival skill. Behind the bar stood a man Jack recognized as Ezra Holt, the post's owner and operator. Holt was a thin, greasy-haired individual with pale eyes that seemed to catalog everything and everyone for potential profit. He looked up as Jack approached, a practiced smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, Jack Morrison, ain't it? Don't see you around these parts often." Holt's voice carried the false warmth of a man trying to separate someone from their money. "Need ammunition," Jack said without preamble. "Rifle cartridges, 4440. Pistol rounds too, if you got 'em." Holt scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Ammunition's been scarce lately. Army's been buying up most of what comes through. What I got left is going to cost you." Jack had expected as much. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch containing most of his savings money he'd been setting aside for new breeding stock. "How much?" Before Holt could answer, a commotion erupted from the back room. Loud voices, one of them clearly distressed, filtered through the thin walls. Jack tried to ignore it, but the sound of what was unmistakably a young woman's voice raised in protest made him glance toward the source of the noise. "Don't mind that," Holt said quickly, his smile becoming more strained. "Just some business being conducted. Now, about that ammunition." The back room door burst open and 3 men emerged. 2 of them were clearly traders or travelers, dust-covered and heavily armed. Between them they half-dragged a young woman who couldn't have been more than 18 or 19 years old. Her dark hair was disheveled, her simple dress torn at the shoulder, and her face showed the kind of determination that comes from refusing to give up even when the situation seems hopeless. "She's caused us nothing but trouble since Santa Fe," one of the men was saying to Holt. "Tried to run 3 times, bit Jimmy's hand when he tried to feed her, and she don't speak much English besides no and a string of what I assume are Spanish curse words." Jack felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard stories about this kind of trade, but seeing it firsthand was different. The girl's eyes swept the room, looking for any possible escape route or ally, and for a moment they met his. What he saw there wasn't fear or pleading, but a kind of fierce defiance that reminded him of a cornered wildcat. "What are you looking to get for her?" Holt asked, examining the girl like she was livestock. "We was hoping for cash money, but we'd consider a trade. We're running low on supplies and we got a long way to go before we reach civilization again." Jack found himself speaking before he'd fully thought through what he was doing. "What kind of trade?" All eyes in the immediate area turned to him. The girl's gaze was particularly intense, as if she was trying to figure out whether he represented hope or just another kind of threat. One of the traders, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, grinned. "You interested, friend? She's young, healthy, and she'll learn to do what she's told eventually. They all do." I asked what kind of trade. Jack repeated, his voice flat and cold. "Well, we need ammunition most of all. Been having trouble with Apache war parties and we're down to our last few rounds. Good rifle cartridges are worth their weight in gold out here." Jack looked at the girl again. She was watching the conversation with obvious understanding, despite the trader's assumption about her English. Her hands were bound with rough rope and he could see raw marks on her wrists where she'd been fighting against her restraints. "How much ammunition?" he asked. The traders exchanged glances. "We'll throw in a fair amount of supplies too, coffee, beans, some salt pork, but we need enough ammunition to get us through to California." Jack was quiet for a long moment, thinking. He'd come here for ammunition to protect his ranch and his cattle. Trading it all away for a girl he didn't know made no practical sense whatsoever. It would leave him vulnerable and nearly broke. But he kept thinking about Sarah, about the fever that took her, about how helpless he'd felt watching her fade away while being unable to do anything about it. Here was something he could do something about. "I got 50 rounds of rifle ammunition in my saddlebags," he said finally. 20 rounds for my pistol, some shot for a scattergun too. That's barely enough to get us through to the next trading post," the second trader complained. "It's enough to handle any trouble you're likely to face if you keep your heads down and travel smart," Jack replied. "Take it or leave it." The bearded trader looked at his companion, then at the girl, then back at Jack. "You drive a hard bargain, mister, but we need those bullets more than we need the trouble she's been causing. Deal." Jack nodded and went to retrieve his ammunition from his saddlebags. As he walked past the girl, she whispered something in Spanish that he didn't understand, but her tone suggested it might have been either a prayer or a warning. When he returned with the ammunition, the traders quickly inspected it and seemed satisfied. The bearded one cut the ropes binding the girl's hands and gave her a not too gentle push toward Jack. "She's your problem now," he said. "Fair warning, she's got claws." The traders gathered their things and left quickly, as if afraid Jack might change his mind. Holt watched the whole transaction with obvious disappointment. He'd clearly been hoping to make a larger profit from the situation. Jack found himself standing in the middle of the trading post with a young woman who was eyeing him warily, rubbing circulation back into her wrist. The other patrons had returned to their drinks and conversations, apparently considering the matter settled. "You speak English?" Jack asked quietly. "Si. Yes," she replied, her accent thick but her words clear. "You buy me?" It was a fair question, and Jack wasn't entirely sure how to answer it. "I guess I did. What's your name?" "Rosa Martinez," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "And I belong to nobody." Despite everything, Jack almost smiled. "Fair enough, Rosa Martinez. I'm Jack Morrison. I got a ranch about 2 hours' ride from here. You want to come with me, or would you rather take your chances here?" Rosa looked around the trading post at the rough men and the predatory stares, then back at Jack. "You help me get home." "Where's home?" "Santa Fe. Mi familia. My family is there." Jack considered this. Santa Fe was more than a week's hard ride through dangerous country, and he had cattle to tend and a ranch to run. But looking at Rosa's hopeful expression, he found himself nodding. "We'll figure something out," he said. "But first, let's get away from here." They rode through the night, Jack leading the way on familiar trails while Rosa sat behind him on his horse. She had initially been reluctant to get so close to a stranger, but the alternative was walking, and she seemed to understand that speed was important in putting distance between them and Copper Creek. As the sun began to rise, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and red, Jack finally called a halt near a small spring where he'd camped before. There was good grass for the horse and clean water, and the location was defensible if anyone decided to follow them. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he told Rosa as he helped her down from the horse. "Then we'll head to my ranch. It's safe there." Rosa nodded and walked to the spring to wash her face and hands. In the morning light, Jack could see that she was even younger than he'd first thought, probably no more than 17. but there was a maturity in her bearing that spoke of hard experience. "How did you end up with those men?" Jack asked as he unsaddled his horse. Rosa was quiet for a moment, staring into the clear water of the spring. "My father, he owe money to bad men in Santa Fe. When he cannot pay, they take me instead. Say I work for them until debt is paid." "What kind of work?" Rosa's expression darkened. "The kind that destroy a girl's soul. I run away first chance I get, but they catch me, sell me to those hombres who say they take me to California. Find me work in household there." She laughed bitterly. "I know what kind of household they mean." Jack felt a familiar anger building in his chest. He'd seen enough of the world to know exactly what kind of fate Rosa had been heading toward. "Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You say you help me get home," Rosa said, turning to face him. "But why? What you want from?" It was a reasonable question, and Jack supposed he owed her an honest answer. "I lost someone once. My wife. She died of fever and there wasn't anything I could do to save her. Maybe helping you is a way of making up for that." Rosa studied his face carefully, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded and said, "Gracias, thank you." They reached Jack's ranch as the afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon. The spread wasn't much to look at. A modest cabin, a barn, a few outbuildings, and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully, but it was honest work and honest living, and Jack had built it with his own hands. "Is pretty," Rosa said as they approached the cabin. "Peaceful." "It suits me," Jack replied. "You can have the cabin. I'll sleep in the barn until we figure out what to do next." Rosa stopped walking and stared at him. "You give me your house? It's just for a few days until I can arrange to get you back to Santa Fe. There's food in the pantry, and the pump works if you want to wash up. Just try not to burn the place down." For the first time since he'd met her, Rosa smiled. It transformed her face completely, making her look like the young woman she should have been instead of someone who'd seen too much too young. "I can cook," she offered. "I can clean too. My mama, she teach me to keep house." Jack nodded. "That'd be helpful. I'm not much of a cook myself." Over the next few days they settled into an easy routine. Jack tended his cattle and worked on ranch maintenance while Rosa kept house and prepared meals. She was an excellent cook and Jack found himself looking forward to dinner in a way he hadn't since Sarah died. Rosa proved to be more than just helpful around the house. She had a natural way with animals, and the cattle seemed to respond to her presence. She also had sharp eyes and good instincts, spotting potential problems before they became serious issues. "You have wolves," she told Jack one evening as they sat on the cabin's front porch watching the sunset. "I see tracks by the north pasture." Jack nodded grimly. "I know. I've been keeping an eye on them. Usually they don't bother full-grown cattle, but if they get hungry enough." "In Santa Fe, my uncle, he have ranch too. He say best way to deal with wolves is make them fear you. Show them you are more dangerous than they are. That usually requires ammunition," Jack said ruefully, "which I seem to be fresh out." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You trade all your bullets for me. Now you cannot protect your ranch." "I'll figure something out," Jack assured her. "Maybe make a trip to the territorial capital, see if I can find ammunition there. That is many days away." "Wolves, they no wait for you to come back." She was right and Jack knew it. He'd been trying not to think about the predicament he'd put himself in by trading away all his ammunition. It had seemed like the right thing to do at the time, but now he was facing the reality of trying to protect a ranch and livestock without the means to do so effectively. The wolf problem came to a head 3 nights later. Jack was awakened by the sound of cattle lowing in distress, and the unmistakable howling of a pack on the hunt. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside, knowing it was probably futile. The gun was useless without ammunition. Rosa met him on the porch, fully dressed despite the late hour. "I hear them too," she said. "They are in the north pasture." Jack could see dark shapes moving among his cattle in the moonlight. The pack was large, maybe 6 or 7 wolves, and they were working together to separate a young steer from the herd. Without ammunition, all Jack could do was yell and wave his arms, hoping to scare them off through noise and intimidation. It didn't work. The wolves were too hungry and too confident. Jack watched helplessly as they brought down the steer, knowing that once they had a taste of success, They'd be back for more. "I'm sorry," he told Rosa as they watched the pack feed. "I should have thought this through better. Now I'm going to lose cattle and probably the ranch along with them." Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I have idea, but going to like it." "What kind of idea?" "In Santa Fe, my cousin he make fireworks for festivals. Big explosions, lots of noise, very scary. He teach me how to make small ones." Jack looked at her skeptically. "Fireworks? Sick. You have gunpowder?" "Yes, and metal scraps. Maybe some nails or small stones." Jack nodded slowly. "I've got some black powder for reloading cartridges, and plenty of scrap metal in the barn." "Bueno, we make loud noises, bright flashes. Wolves, they think is gunfire but much more scary. They no come back after that." It was a crazy idea, but Jack didn't have any better alternative. They spent the rest of the night in the barn, with Rosa carefully measuring out small portions of black powder and wrapping them with metal scraps in pieces of cloth. Jack wasn't entirely sure what she was doing, but she seemed to know her business. "My cousin, he is very careful with these," Rosa explained as she worked. "Too much powder and you blow up more than you want. Too little and is just like small firecracker." By dawn they had created nearly 24 small explosive devices. Rosa had also fashioned several larger ones using empty tin cans and more generous portions of powder. "These," she said, pointing to the smaller devices, "we throw at wolves when they come back. Make noise and bright light, maybe scare them. These," she indicated the larger cans, "we save for if they run away." Jack had serious doubts about the plan, but as evening approached and he saw the dark shapes gathering at the edge of his property again, he was willing to try anything. The wolves returned just after sunset, bolder now after their success the previous night. This time they went straight for the cattle, ignoring Jack's shouts and attempts at intimidation. "Now?" Rosa asked, holding one of her improvised devices. Jack nodded, and Rosa lit the fuse with a burning stick. The small explosive sailed through the air and detonated with a sharp crack and a bright flash about 20 feet from the nearest wolf. The animal yelped and jumped backward, clearly startled. "Again," Jack said, and they began throwing the devices in rapid succession. The effect was dramatic. The wolves, already nervous about human presence, panicked at the sudden explosions. They scattered in all directions, abandoning their hunt and fleeing into the darkness. But Rosa wasn't finished. She grabbed one of the larger tin can bombs and lit its fuse. "For the leader," she said, and hurled it toward the retreating pack. The explosion when it hit the ground was impressive, a loud boom that echoed across the valley, accompanied by a shower of sparks and metal fragments. Jack's ears rang and he could smell sulfur and smoke in the air. The wolves were nowhere to be seen, and Jack's cattle had settled down apparently unharmed by the pyrotechnics. "Think that'll keep them away?" Jack asked. Rosa smiled. "My cousin, he say animals have long memory for things that frighten them. They think this place is full of thunder and lightning now. They find easier meal somewhere else." She was right. Over the next several weeks, there were no signs of wolf activity on Jack's ranch. The cattle grazed peacefully, and Jack was able to focus on other aspects of ranch management. During this time he and Rosa had several conversations about her return to Santa Fe. Jack had made inquiries, and learned that there would be a supply wagon heading in that direction within the month. The wagon master was a reputable man, who could be trusted to see Rosa safely to her destination. But as the departure date approached, Jack found himself increasingly reluctant to see her go. Rosa had brought something to the ranch that he hadn't realized was missing. Not just her practical help, but her presence, her laughter, her stories about her family and her life in Santa Fe. "You know," Jack said one evening as they sat on the porch, "you don't have to go back if you don't want to. I mean, if your family's in debt to dangerous men, maybe Santa Fe isn't the safest place for you." Rosa was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade from the western sky. "I think about this too," she admitted, "but my family, they worry about me. They think I am dead maybe. I must let them know I am safe." "Of course," Jack said, "I understand that, but maybe after you see them, you might consider coming back here. The ranch could use someone with your skills." Rosa turned to look at him, and Jack could see something unreadable in her expression. "You want me to come back?" "I'd like that," Jack said honestly. "If you'd want to,
I mean, no obligations. You'd be a partner. Not what those men intended you to be. Partner. Equal share in the ranch. Your name on the deed. Your choice about everything. Rosa was quiet for a long time, and Jack began to worry that he'd overstepped somehow. But finally she smiled and said, I think I would like that very much. The supply wagon arrived on schedule, and Jack helped Rosa gather her few belongings for the journey to Santa Fe. She had insisted on taking some of her remaining explosive devices with her, both for protection and to show her cousin what she'd learned about their practical application. You sure you'll come back? Jack asked, as the wagon prepared to depart. See, Rosa said firmly, I have new family here now too. I know abandon that. She was gone for 6 weeks, and Jack found the ranch feeling emptier than it ever had. Even during his years of complete solitude, he threw himself into his work, making improvements and preparations for Rosa's return. When she finally came back, she wasn't alone. Behind her rode a young man who looked enough like her to obviously be a relative. This is my brother Miguel, Rosa announced as they approached the cab. He wants to see this place where his sister is partner. Miguel dismounted and looked around the ranch with obvious approval. Rosa, she tell us much about you, Senor Morrison, about how you save her, about the wolves and the thunder sticks, our family. We are grateful. How are things in Santa Fe? Jack asked. The men your father owed money to. Miguel's expression darkened. They cause no more trouble. Word spread about what happened to the men who take Rosa. Other families, they band together. These bad men, they decide maybe other business is more profitable. Over dinner, Miguel explained that he'd come not just to check on Rosa, but to propose a business arrangement. Our family, we have connections throughout New Mexico territory. We know where to buy cattle cheap, where to sell for good price. Your ranch, it could be much bigger with right partnerships. The three of them talked late into the night about possibilities and plans. Miguel would return to Santa Fe and begin setting up trade relationships, while Jack and Rosa worked on expanding the ranch's capacity. As they were preparing for bed, Rosa pulled Jack aside. You sure about this? She asked. Making me partner, bringing my family into business, is big change from quiet life. Jack looked at her, this young woman who'd gone from victim to survivor to partner in the space of a few months, and realized that quiet wasn't always the same thing as peaceful. I'm sure. Besides, someone needs to keep making those thunder sticks of yours. Never know when we might need them. Rosa laughed. See, and I have ideas for bigger ones. Maybe we sell them to other ranchers who have wolf problems. Now you're thinking like a true business partner. Jack's. The next morning, Miguel prepared to return to Santa Fe, with messages for the family and plans for future cooperation. As he mounted his horse, he clasped Jack's hand. You give my sister back her life, he said seriously. Our family, we no forget this debt. No debt, Jack replied. We're family now. After Miguel left, Jack and Rosa stood on the porch, looking out over their ranch. The cattle were grazing peacefully. The morning sun was warming the valley, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of Miguel's horse moving toward the horizon. So, Jack said, partner, what do you want to work on first? Rosa smiled and pulled a small wrapped bundle from her pocket. I save one special thunder stick for celebration, she said. Is bigger than others. Want to see? Jack grinned. Light it up. Rosa struck a match and touched it to the fuse. They watched the small flame travel along the cord. Then Rosa hurled the device high into the air. It exploded in a shower of sparks, and a booming sound that echoed across the valley. The cattle looked up briefly, then went back to graze. They'd gotten used to the sound of Rosa's fireworks by now. Beautiful, Jack said, watching the last sparks fade. See, Rosa agreed, and that was the last bullet. Jack looked at her curiously. What do you mean? You trade all your bullets to save me, Rosa explained. Then I help you burn through all your gunpowder to save the ranch. Now we start fresh, with no old ammunition and no old debts, just what we build together. Jack nodded. Understand. They'd both arrived at this point through loss and hardship, but they'd also arrived as equals, as partners who'd chosen to build something new together. No more bullets, he agreed, just thunder sticks, and cattle and whatever comes next. And family, Rosa added. Don't forget family. Never. Jack promised, and meant it. As they walked back toward the cabin, planning their day's work and their future, The sound of Rosa's laughter echoed across the valley like the promise of good things to come.